before we start, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. I'd like to recognize that St. Catherine University is on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota people, specifically the Bahapakuti and the Ochedi-Shakowin. We offer our honor and respect to the Dakota people and to this land, which deserves our care, our responsibility, and our reciprocity now and into the future. The future was on my mind when I listened to St. Kate's student Sophia Vanderlyn give a land acknowledgement before a recent performance of contemporary Indigenous storytellers at the O'Shaughnessy last weekend. Sophia is the founder, president of the Indigenous Student Alliance Club here, and during her land acknowledgement, she shared the 7 generations teaching. She explained that this form of Indigenous knowledge invites us to think 7 generations ahead and consider, will the decisions we make today benefit our future descendants and community? How will we care for the land in a way that also ensures the care of future generations? Similarly, Joseph M. Pierce, a professor at Stony Brook University and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, challenges us to reframe our own relationships with the land. He writes, land is a gift, a relative, a body that sustains other bodies, and if the land is our relative, then we cannot simply acknowledge it as land. We must understand what our responsibilities are to the land as our kin. To engage with the land on the land's terms is an act of reciprocity. Reciprocity rather than recognition is what the land requires, because that is what the land has already given. Are you not alive, breathing because of this land? Thank you. So Erica's going to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and I think she's also interested in conversation with all of you, so this is kind of casual, more dialogue based. And then of course we'll have time for questions, so definitely keep those in mind. As you can see, Lisa's recording tonight's event, so it will be up on the gallery website in a few weeks. And so without further ado, I thought I'd introduce Erica, and then I'll turn it over to you. So I'm going to read some information from her bio, and you can read a more extended version of this on the gallery website. So Erica creates handmade paper garments and small editions of hand-bound books. She received her BFA and MFA at the University of Minnesota, which included coursework in Mexico and Greece. Her current work explores family stories and issues of identity. Erica is a recipient of the 2018 Minnesota Book Artist Award and various grants from the Minnesota State Arts Board. She teaches studio arts as a full professor at Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, and her artwork is exhibited nationally and internationally and is included in several public and private collections, including the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Minnesota Center for Book Arts, and the Minnesota History Center. Please join me in welcoming Erica Spitzer Rasmussen.
Thank you. You know, I have narratives for each of my pieces that are here in the gallery. So, you know, they're very concise, and I think, you know, well measured. But you can do that yourself. So, you know, read those yourself. So, what I thought I'd do is just tell you some stories, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to move around. Okay, so I think what I'll do is start with this piece over here, because it's work, it's beautiful, that is important to, I think, the development of my work here. Turn it around, you can face forward. When I was working on my master's degree at the University of Minnesota, I was in drawing and painting, and my subject matter always dealt with the body. I was so interested in it, in looking at it from different perspectives. You know, like you can talk about the body from an anatomical sense, from a personal sense, from a scientific viewpoint. You know, from so many different ways. And I was teaching drawing one particular winter, I remember. You know what? I may blush up here, but I'm gonna tell you some silly things. Like, this was the first winter in my life since, well, as an adult, that I was letting my body hair grow out for a couple of reasons. One, Craig didn't seem to mind. Two, a little extra insulation in the cold of Minnesota, right? Couldn't hurt. And frankly, it was just, it took so much time, you know? I added it up once. If, you know, it takes me 4 to 6 minutes to shave my legs, you know, every other day, then that's like 18 hours in a year or something. I said, like, wow, did I do an extra 18 hours? Anyhow, that winter I took my students to the dairy barn at the University of Minnesota. And we, while we were there, we happened to witness a cow give birth. Now, this was really exciting for me and my students. I'm a city girl, right? You know, I've always lived in urban areas. And this cow, she was having trouble with the birth. And so all my students and I hunkered down and we started chanting for the cow. We wanted to give her support. So we said, "Go, cow, go." And we did this really low, quiet, right? Almost like a whisper. "Go, cow, go." And finally, the veterinarian had to step in there and provide assistance, you know, like puts his whole arm in there and turns things around and pulls this other animal out of this other animal, right? And it was like origami. Have you seen this, right? Like this calf got up and just unfolded and just about stood up. You know, you couldn't believe how large this baby was, right? And all my students cheered. It was wonderful. We had a moment. And then what the cow did was she ate the placenta. Right, and they do that, right? So the veterinarian explained to us that if the cow was in the wild, she would have done this for 2 reasons, right? First of all, you want to mask the scent so that predators don't come around, right? And you know this, right? I see head nodding, yeah. And secondly, there's a lot of nutritional value in the placenta. So my students got really grossed out and they were making all kinds of noises. Ooh, and gross. And I thought to myself, no big deal, that's a perfectly natural occurrence. This is going somewhere. There is a So, the same night, I was in the bath, and I looked down at my hairy legs, and suddenly I felt sick to my stomach. I thought, now that's weird. I almost felt, you know, as if I might toss my cookies. I did not, but I thought, that's so weird. How can I watch a cow eat a placenta and have no adverse reaction, but then do my own harmless leg hair and feel sick to my stomach? This is not right. So I started thinking back, how in the world did I develop that reaction to my body? And while I was in the bath, a memory came to me. And that was when I was little, my dad told me that eating tomatoes would make me big and strong and hairy-chested. I heard it over and over again in my childhood. Now, that actually turned me off to tomatoes. I didn't eat them for 20 years. But my brother, he went on to eat tomatoes, and you should see how hairy he turned out. So anyhow, so this is what this particular work is about. I call it Tomatic Jacket. And if you look inside the jacket, you'll see that I've embroidered some tomato patterns inside. And then I've used human hair to adorn the edges. And then what is this tan bristly stuff? It's jute primarily, you know, like from jute bags and things, and some field grass, and a little bit of camel hair. Why camel hair? When I started doing some research about the symbolism of hair in the history of Western art. And one of the things that I came to find was the hair shirt itself. And you know, that was often made with the bristly hairs, the short hairs of a camel, because it was meant to irritate the skin, and one was supposed to, you know, turn their energies to a higher source and so forth. and be uncomfortable physically. Well, yes, because indeed it would make welts all over your skin, right? Anyhow, I made friends with the camel keeper at the Minnesota Zoo so that I had a source of camel hair. And so there is some camel hair in there. And then what I did was I adorned the wall here in my kind of, you know, diamond pattern here with dehydrated cherry tomatoes. So what is all of this? But it's a materialization of kind of, or illustration really, of my mind as a child, you know. Obviously, you know, when you're little, you don't know truth from fiction, right? And so I believe my dad in those early years. The theater of my mind is a very active place. And sometimes I have found that when I make things, which is a very, very slow process, usually because I'm a paper maker and I start from the ground up, it takes many months to execute a garment. And then that gives me time to kind of ruminate on these issues and, you know, ideas and so forth. Now I have to tell you, my father was a professor of sociology. And he had a tendency to evaluate value women oftentimes by their exteriors. And I always heard him like rating women, you know, on scales, like 1 to 10 or what have you, or commenting on their body parts. And that really scared me as a child, because I thought, well, if this is, you know, if this is a reflection of his studies or his teachings, this does not, you know, bode well for so many of us. And then I think, you know, as I got older, it really started to irritate me and aggravate me. My mother, on the other hand, talking about body issues and, you know, thinking about all of these things connected to what our ideals are about beauty, my mother always was, you know, on the opposite page. I mean, she always told me that, of course, a woman's value is in her intellect and in her character and things like that. But it was confusing to me for a long time because I was getting mixed messages. And so I use garments as a way to talk about these body issues. It's a way for me to kind of step back a little bit and be a little more poetic in addressing these topics. And I use the tomato in this configuration, you know, the little cherry ones, dehydrated, I think of them almost as scabs. You know, they're very bodily in terms of their color and so forth, but I think about them in terms of kind of like their healing components. And I think it took me many years to kind of, get over some of my issues about my own body. So here's a funny thing though. When I told my dad, and I was in grad school by then, that I remembered this story about the tomatoes, he denied it. He said, I never told you that. That was your reality, not my reality. And I know that people remember things differently. You do. But that was really curious. He was really mad that I would talk about this publicly. But then, as my profile started to rise, and I started getting shows and, you know, and started showing internationally and so forth, then my dad's tune changed a little bit. I sent him an article that I wrote for Hand Papermaking magazine that addressed this topic, and then I called him up and he said, I want to talk to you about that article. And I thought, oh gee, I better sit down. This could be a long, difficult conversation. And he said, now I remember. So I guess that article jogged his memory, or maybe because, you know, my profile was on the rise. He wanted to take some credit for it. I don't know. But I'm just glad that he finally came around and we could start talking about these things in his elder years. Okay, so that's one story. Okay, about my tomatoes. Let's see, what else should we talk about? Oh, so many things. These corsets over here are wearable. They're sliced down the side and they have grommets, so you can lace a lady into it, and they have been worn on in runway shows. But I think of them as I think about the dualities that constantly interest me in my work. For instance, I referenced here the polarities between masculinity and femininity, beastliness and humanity, and also attraction and repulsion. So I like to use a lot of weird materials, and I like to cause people to kind of slow down and maybe, spend a little time with it and then realize what they're looking at, and then maybe they get a whiff of it even and they gotta step back. I like that tension that comes between attraction and repulsion. I think there's a lot of power in that space in between. And so that's what these particular works are. Some of the materials here, you recognize these are my dehydrated cherry tomatoes and human hair tassels. This is a paper corset that's been painted with tomato paste, which I stabilize a little bit with some matte medium. And of course, gold leaf baby bottle nipples, inspired by our cat, Misha. This one is makes use of rusty bottle caps, and is trimmed with human hair. And I was thinking about armor and making a surface that feels kind of repellent, because I want to think about how to protect a feminine identity, because especially when we're younger and we're kind of materializing our sense of self, I think that young women are in need of, and sometimes an extra layer, because boy, it can be hard, right? Growing into yourself, your body and your mind, Here's another piece I want to talk about over here. This is not all about, issues with hair, all about hair. This one I want to talk about, I call Juju dress. And, I have been spending a lot of years working on my career, both teaching and exhibiting. And then I got to my mid-30s and I suddenly discovered, you know what? I want a family. It's gonna be now or never. And unfortunately, my body was not ready to get with the program. So I had to enlist some medical assistance, and I made myself this dress that summer, which would have been 2003, so it tells me. And you may remember that at some point in the early 2000s, they started, watermelon people, started genetically modifying the seeds so that they started getting smaller. Remember when I was a kid, they were like this big, and we used to, eat watermelon. Yeah, why watermelons, Erica? I'll tell you. Anyhow, watermelon seeds kept getting smaller. Now, why watermelon seeds? Another myth came back to me when I was struggling with infertility, and that was the belief was when I was a girl that if you swallowed a watermelon seed, that's how you got pregnant. Right. Now I tried swallowing a watermelon seed that summer and it didn't work. But anyhow, I think it's brilliant, because think about the shape of a watermelon, right? Like a belly. But also seeds are a universal symbol of fertility, right? Okay, so Craig and I ate a lot of watermelon that summer. We saved the little seeds, which I dried out and drilled into them. I made this dress, which is wearable, and I cast all these little paper plates, and what I was looking at was Italian Under Armour. because what I was doing was fighting infertility. So I was thinking about, these metaphors and so forth. And the juncture of every plate, silver or gold plate, I tied a watermelon seed. What I was trying to do was to enlist magical forces, right? A little assistance. And now I used to wear this. You see, it makes a little noise. When I would wear it to my monthly procedures. And the nurses loved it because they could hear me coming down the hallway, right? Anyhow, this is an amazing thing. I'm gonna probably blush again. So the day that those monthly procedures didn't help me a lot. And then the day that my mother was gonna write a check for $20,000 so that I could get IV, in vitro, right? At the University of Minnesota, they said, Erica, you have to take a pregnancy test before you come in today, just to make sure. So I did. And you can imagine how surprised I was, when it read positive. So that was just crazy good, right? And the dress has since been retired. Okay, one and I'm done, yeah. And this work over here, this is a work to commemorate the conception of our child. Some of you no rigor. Anyhow, this is about my work, about my body finally getting it right. It's called Red Hot. And as you can probably see if you get up close, what have I adorned it with but matchsticks, right? Those red tip matchsticks. And these are my ovaries, represent my ovaries, right? And so that's what that work is about. I decided that I wanted to put in some backdrops behind some of these pieces, frankly, because I thought it would give them a little more depth and a little more interest, especially from a distance, This work is, and you know this, some of you may recognize these parts, right? Yeah. I had to explain this to a couple of students recently, what these things were, right? Garters to hold your silk stockings up and so forth, right? But this work is about something entirely different. This is about my struggles with insomnia. And I decided what I needed to do was to, I saved, my prescription labels for my sleeping pills for years, and then, no, I did not consume all of these, every bottle, like 30 pills, no, that didn't happen. What I did was I saved them for a long time, and then I scanned them, and I used a service called Spoonflower, maybe some of you know it, where you can make fabric and wallpaper and things like that. Through digital means. So what I had them do is make me sticky back wallpaper, and then I adhered it to paper, and then cut them all apart to make for all of these layers here. And I think this is a nightgown. And I just really wanted to emulate those kind of sterile garments that you might wear in a medical environment. So, that's what that work is about. Shoes, let's talk about shoes. Love shoes. Okay, this work here, Dream Sequence, is just about my love-hate relationship with shoes. When I was younger, I had to stuff, I didn't have to, but I did. I stuffed my big feet, and I wear size 11 feet, or the shoes I wear 11, excuse me. And I used to stuff them into teeny tiny shoes that were pointy. And that, of course, has created all kinds of, problems for me. And so I still love stilettos, but I can't wear them anymore, really. Sometimes I'll go into a shoe store and I'll find a pair of black 11s I just have to have. And it's like, I cannot not buy them if they're on sale. Even though I know I will only wear them once, and then I'll curse myself, and then I'll have to use them as molds to me. Right, yeah, because I have to have them, you know. And as you can see here, I used in these paper shoes some X-Acto knives,
Yes.
just in a decorative manner, because it's really about my contemplation of surgery. Like, will I ever get it done? Will I ever get my feet fixed? Probably not. You know, because then I have to spend like 6 months in orthopedic boots.
Right.
That's just, yeah, no, not stylish. Probably not gonna happen, you know? And that's what this piece is about here, that's behind you with the fossilized shark teeth. That's about my, again, my issues with my feet. And I just kind of wanted, I call it creature of habit. But it's kind of just about that whole painful experience of putting your feet in these things, you know? Like, whose foot is shaped like that? Only Barbie's, yeah, right? Yeah. So, yeah. So shoes, yeah, shoes. Clothing, shoes, they're all a way for me just to talk about what's going on in my life and what's going on generally more specifically with my body. I'll tell you about one more piece and I'm gonna ask you some questions. This one is called Things One's Child Needn't See. And the idea came to me when my former boyfriend, who was a photographer, sent me a box full of photographs of myself from my youth. Recently, you know, this was like 30 plus years ago. He took these photographs, and the photographs were taken on, you know, I was happy to be a participant, but it was long before my exposure to feminist theory. And I'm not sure that I would make the same decisions today that I did back then. So I decided, you know, the thing to do was to cut them up so tiny that, yeah, you could make heads or tails of the imagery. And I certainly didn't want my kid to come across them, you know, at some point later, you know, like after my demise, you know, stuffed in a drawer somewhere. So that's what that particular work is about. And it emulates, really, fairly accurately, the type of dress that I, you know, was fond of wearing in, say, my early 20s, yeah, or my later teens. So that's what that work is about. So, you know, as you can see, I like to use materials that help me to tell my stories. And I think that they often offer this kind of visceral quality, which helps me to get my ideas across. And it's not really important to me all the time that people always know what it is, or you know, but I do find that when I provide narratives for people, these short, concise things that don't take people long to read, that they often tell me it helps me for them to connect to the work.
Yes.
And so I continue to do that. Yeah.
You know, speaking of that, I hope you do talk about the Chinese jacket, because I'm one of the oldest people here, probably. So that would have significance.
Sure. I made this work in the year 2000. And, you know, I have a lot of anxieties about my body, but I think the biggest one is losing this. Now, because I've grown quite accustomed to living in this body, and I made this in preparation for my own death. I was thinking about this lovely practice that some Asian people, you know, utilize, that they should burn joss paper at funerals. And maybe you've seen it. It's this lovely gold or silver leaf paper, which you can buy in a commonplace Asian grocery. And that's, you know, what these plates are made out of, which I've altered a little bit, you know, like I've weathered them a little bit and cut them smaller. But I like this idea that if joss paper is burned ceremoniously at funerals, then one's wishes and prayers are taken to the departed as the smoke rises. And I thought, oh, what a lovely tradition maybe what I can do is make myself something to wear to my funeral and cremation. You gotta, there's me always thinking forward, thinking about what I'm gonna wear. You gotta wear something, right? And maybe I can then have control over my final rites. And if I can bring ultimately some beauty or some humor to my own passing, then it somehow helps me to prepare for that. Yeah. So that's what that's about. And I used a shape that is Chinese in origin for this coat. Yeah, so that's what it is. That's what it's about. Yeah. So now I have questions for you. I find that one of the greatest rewards I ever receive as an artist is when I share stories with someone and they reward me with a story. Maybe about a myth from their childhood or some erroneous fact about the body or what have you. And so my question for you is there anybody else that has stories that they might like to share?
When you were talking about that, I have a friend who was talking about preparing for her death. She's 76, and so she didn't want to burden her children with all the things you might have. And she and her husband have gotten far enough to know that they want to do a natural burial. But then she hasn't really done much of anything else. The one thing she has done is to buy the nightgown that she wants to wear, and she felt like that was something she could control, as you were saying too. So she has that, and not that she thinks she's gonna die, right away, but and in the meantime, she hasn't figured out anything else. But she said, at least I have the outfit. So it just reminded me of
Good
that.
for her.
Yeah.
That's nice. Thank you. Anybody else? I have another story I could share with you, which is not about me. But I had, one of my friends in grad school was raised in Kentucky. And she, her stepfather told her when she was little that not only would eating bread crust put hair on her chest, but it would cause her to change genders entirely. So here we were in grad school, we're both like in our late 20s, maybe early 30s, and we'd go to lunch, and I'd avoid tomatoes. She'd cut her bread crust off of her sandwich. And I made a work about that, actually. I collected her bread crust for many months and made a piece about her experience. Because I know that I'm not alone in this, And it's a really an interesting one, like, why hair? Or, chest hair and foodstuffs, what's the relationship with that? One of the things I found, of course, in my research is just the association sometimes between hair and power, right? Like Samson and Delilah, right? And so forth. And so there's a lot of, hair is, oftentimes associated with men and power. So that's my greatest, guess, is that hair, is more often a symbol of masculinity, depending where it is, right? Because on a woman's head, that's her crown and glory. And if we look back at 14th century paintings, right, well, then that's a whole different story of, nude women. But, so mostly hair for men and hairlessness for women. So I don't know, it's an interesting history that I think is deeply embedded in all of us. Being the daughter of a sociologist, I know that we are culturally conditioned, right? We all grow up looking at, most of us, fashion magazines and movies, and we all gain these ideas about what bodily beauty is. And maybe more recently we have, more options Yeah. But in my childhood, it was pretty rigid and it was pretty confusing.
You mentioned you have a child, is it a daughter or a son?
A son
A son?
who's now a daughter.
Okay, so
Yep.
do you think your daughter is taking notes also about you as parents? Like, okay, so gonna also in
Yes.
10, 20 years, gonna present a
Yeah.
room full of this, full of wonderful thoughts?
Yeah, because she's an artist, you bet, yeah, I do. I do think about
Yeah.
all the things, you know, that we say,
Hmm?
you know, and how we influence her, but I think, you know, we're pretty liberal and pretty accepting and, you know, all of that, so that's good. But sure, our kid's gonna have some issues, no doubt, and blame them on us down the line. Don't we all?
Yes.
Yeah.
But won't have the same issues you have.
Right.
I do think that we learn from what we received or what we didn't receive. And I think we really try
Yeah.
to make up for that with our own children. At least that was my case. That you really try to not influence your child, negatively influence your child in the way that you were.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Agreed, yeah, we try to be, thoughtful,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I also think like children internalize a lot of stuff that they don't talk about, you know? And I think that's kind of an interesting, I'm reading Demon, Copperhead.
Oh, yeah.
And it's David Copperfield, but told through Kentucky.
Yeah.
And it's a smart kid and all this crazy stuff happens to him, but and it reminds me of his, well, I can't speak for anybody else, I certainly internalize a lot of things where you'd just be like, holy crap, you know, like, like for example, my mother and I used to take, the bus downtown in Columbus, Ohio, and I was probably like 5, and we would go to a thrift store, and I still go to thrift stores. And she said, just think, in 2 or 3 years, you can take the bus downtown by yourself. And I look out the window and I go, oh shit. You know, like, all by myself. I never told her that was like so terrifying to me. Like, I gotta negotiate all of this by myself. But I ended up to be a very independent person. You know, so how you internalize it and then you realize she would trust me to take the bus. So just, that just sparked that.
Yeah, that's nice. So tell me, Carol, how old were you, do you think, when you started taking the bus yourself?
I was in 3rd grade, so maybe 8.
Wow.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's young.
Yeah, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And you did it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even worry about that. Yeah.
That's nice.
So I wonder if some of the magic is gone because of the internet and all the information we have. Like if you were a little girl and your dad said, well, if you eat tomatoes, you're gonna get hair in your chest.
Oh, yeah.
So now you could check it out, like, well, I get hair in my chest. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I wonder if some of the magic's gone, just because we can verify everything in the whole world immediately.
It may not be correct.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's conflicting
Yeah.
views of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Some
right.
say
It certainly,
yes, some say no.
it certainly was a different age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there was the Encyclopedia Britannica. When, I have a brother that was a year ahead of me in school, and we were 18 months apart in age, but anyway, he told me that there was a Santa Claus. And so I went to check it out with my mom. And she said, look it up in the encyclopedia. So I did, you know, and at like 5 or 6. So I did. And certainly there was a Santa Claus in the encyclopedia. I mean, but it made me think of the Googling now. But she was just right there. Look it up, you know.
so much about like verifying information, but I think the thing that sort of fascinated them was like there's this like archive of things that like we talked, like one of the things that I think we were trying to connect on is like I have photo albums full of photos and their archive is in their hand on their phone, and like they could delete their account and it would all go away, right? And no one could see it. Even though we all know it kind of lives on anyway, right? Like you can find anything these days. But like just the idea of like having to, I think, to negotiate the permanence of those photographs and like frame them in a way that you're comfortable with now, like as a physical object. I think that might have been the thing that was sort of interesting to them. I think I don't know, Amy, does that feel like, because it was your class, but they seemed really fascinated by that part of it, you know.
Yeah.
And I shared with you too that for me that piece brings to mind all the journals I kept in high school that I still have that make me cringe. Like I read them like, oh my God.
Yes, but you're gonna come over and we're gonna pull
we're
this
gonna
somewhere.
because I can't bring myself to destroy them.
Right.
They're so like valuable. Like I care about them so much, but I would never want my own sons to read them. Like,
Right.
Ever.
Right.
Or even my husband. I don't think I want anyone to read them.
Right. See, and that's what those shoes are about, right behind you, right there, the gold ones. It's about, I pulverized 27 secrets that I wrote down one day, just as an exercise in self-reflection. And I was so embarrassed, I thought, I can't have these sitting about.
Right.
I have to shred them up and make them into paper.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll do the same
Yeah.
with journals.
There's sort
If
of
you're
like
willing.
a ceremonial aspect to your work that way. I
Mhm.
think the sort of like reclaiming or taking control, like reframing the story in a way that sort of like reflects, I think, your evolution as a person and your and like how you're thinking about your past, your present, and your future. And so I think for me, like I love that ceremonial quality, like the way you're sort of like marking time, preparing for things in the future, and like you get to continue to tell your story through your work. And that's kind of one of the wonderful qualities of this show.
Thanks. I have to say though, it feels kind of funny, you know, talking about me all the time. I want to say that I think that other people relate to the work because it's not just about me, it's about universal
Right.
things.
Yes, so
You
many
know?
people have
Yes.
said, like, I'm so happy that someone is making art about this and talking about these things openly.
Right, like infertility.
Yes.
And, all kinds of things, right?
That and
Yeah,
and
sexuality
and
and
sexuality and how
identity.
like feeling about our bodies and
yeah, I think, you know, the common elements, are things like shame and fear and, you know, and humor too in my work.
Very funny.
And so I think that's what allows other people to connect with it. Yeah.
Erica, do you see it as, so is it healing for you?
Yes.
So like once you do the work, then you can let go of the angst
Yes.
that helped you create the work.
Absolutely. It's
Okay.
very therapeutic for me to
Okay.
make the work.
Yeah.
And it's so slow moving.
Yes.
You know, like a full size garment, you know,
Yeah.
will take me maybe 6 months to make.
Sure.
Not because I'm not working on it every day, you know,
Right.
but consistently.
Right.
And it just gives me time to think about those things that are important to me and specific to me. And then I feel a sense of release when it's all done.
When you finish it, there
Yeah.
is the release then.
Right,
Great.
yeah.
And that goes on in your bookmaking now.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
We have one book in the show, by the way, that collar over there, which is wearable. I consider it a book. Because if it has pages and it has words, well then it's a book, right? Yeah, and it can function as other things too. Yeah. How are we doing on time?
Just fine.
Okay.
I I wonder if you can talk a little bit about paper.
Sure.
Because I think it's sort of surprising to people when they come in here and realize everything is made with paper.
Sure.
Which I don't know that many of us really associate with garments necessarily, right? In everyday lives.
Yeah, you know, actually paper garments date back to at least the 10th century AD. This is what I found in my research. So, but the material itself, why do I choose it, is I think what you're getting at. Yeah. Well, when I made that leap from painting, oh, you guys, I didn't even talk about that, into sculpture, when I was in grad school, I thought I had a decision to make. If I'm gonna talk about the body, this three-dimensional form, I'm gonna go from 2D to 3D, and I want it to be like clothing or be like skin. I thought I could either choose working in latex or paper, because those were the two materials that I knew would have a skin-like quality. And I decided to go with paper because it's natural and ecologically friendly. And latex, the opposite, right? And so I think of paper as being like the skin itself. It's about fragility and it's about vulnerability. And so that's one of the reasons that I continue to work in it. I can make it very thin, you know, and use it like in the sheath underneath the juju dress. You know, it's like fabric in that it's long and flat, and I can cut it up and I can sew it back together. It's also wonderfully malleable. I mean, what can't you do with paper? Or it can be really durable. Like if you go thud thud on these corsets back here, they're gonna make a little noise. It's almost like balsa wood in terms of its strength and weight. And so, you know, I just love the flexibility of material, and also that, you know, if you do it right, if you don't start introducing chemicals into the process, then, you know, it's all just, it's no problem to be around and no problem to teach, right? And we have in our backyard now a small paper shop for me, which is where I'm working diligently. You'll find me out there, you know, from morning to sunset and during the summer. And all of our paper waste goes out of the paper shop and down the drain and waters the garden down below. So I love that, and that I'm being a steward to the environment in my working methods and in handling my materials. And I think that's something else as an educator that I want to pass along. Yeah. So that's why paper for me. And I just love that you can make it look like so many different things, you know, and you know, through embellishing techniques and so forth. So I use a lot of the techniques that I've learned over the years through my painting education and through my sculptural education. But you know, and I love working with it. I like getting my hands into it. I like getting messy. I like being in the pool of the paper shop in the summer. And so often what I do is I make paper all summer long, and hopefully I make enough paper that I can get through this long, cold Minnesota winters. And if I can't get it all done, then I go to Minnesota Center for Book Arts, where I can use their theater in the middle of the winter. Yeah, because ours is a three-season paper shop.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's fun paper. Thank you.
Anyone have any other questions for you? Got like 10 minutes left.
I'm really glad that you did this, but I'm glad to see it, because it gives other people permission to talk about their past and their changes in life and their early adolescence and some of these things that I'm sure each of us remember, like, I remember the exact moment and what happened and where I first menstruated by surprise,
Wow.
you know, and it's good to talk about those bodily things.
Yes.
And I think people, well, who are older probably than everybody here, probably never had a chance to talk about that. We really do, but back a few years ago, they did not,
Right. Right.
not at all.
Right. I agree. It's so much better that we're talking about these things. Thank you. See, you had a story to share with me, and I feel honored. Thank you. Well, gosh, thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it, and it's so much fun for me to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.